Rutgers, since joining the Big Ten, is 13-66 in Big Ten play. What is up, everybody? It is Jake with Master Football, back at it again. Happy Monday. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to be up to date on everything college football, pro football, Madden, EA college football, NFL draft, anything related to American football, hit the red subscribe button. You'll not be disappointed. Also hit the like button too. Hit the follow button if you're on Twitter. Twitter fam is growing. Without further ado, let's get into the video. All right, guys, here we are on Monday. And again, this is the dog days. I will say this. I saw something the other day. We're less than 50 days away from football season, baby. Let's go. Now, the big issue is we've got a couple things that will kind of appease us coming up here. I know that one big opportunity is that a lot of media days are going to be happening sometime soon. I know we've got the whole fiasco with, whatever's happening with the Big 12 and whether or not they're going to get, Colorado and Arizona. They just came out and said they're not interested in San Diego State, whether or not San Diego State's going to go to the Pac-12, or are they going to bring SMU with them? All that is still up in the air, and I will report on that the second that I get something solid. However, I see something that's more important because, again, I have been on, dare I say, a crusade to make sure we do not have a Power 2 breakaway from the rest of the Power 5. And again, I know a lot of people say, it makes all the sense in the world. This video here is going to show you why it really actually doesn't. However, I will say that going from a smaller conference to a bigger conference, going from a mid-Power 5 conference to a higher Power 5 conference makes all the sense in the world from the from the university's perspective. Keep in mind what I said there, the university's perspective. Everything is good. It gets better. Your research dollars, how many more, alumni you can get, everything like that gets better across the board. Anybody that disagrees with that is what the experts would call an idiot. So we don't talk about idiots. However, I want to talk about this because Ivan Maisel, an extremely well-respected name in the world of college football and in the world of sports writing, had something to say on one of my favorite podcasts, the Sigum 365 guys, 365 Sports. Go check them out on YouTube. I'm going to include the link here in the description as well as the link to the video I'm talking about. He said something that was really, really particular here that up until you think about it, you're like, wow, that actually is really true. So here we are on 365 Sports. And again, this link will be included in the description here. He says every school that we have seen realign to make more money has not been as relevant. Now, do I 100% agree with that point? No, there's certain instances where that's not as correct. However, it's very important to see this, and you're going to see this because what I'm going to do here is I have a document that I created towards the end of this video. We're actually going to go through some of the losers, so to say, from the ROI. I won't say losers because they technically don't lose if you go from a smaller conference to a bigger conference, more money, blah, blah, blah. However, the ROI wasn't there on the field perspective because, again, I've got 4 schools, I've got 3, and then an honorable mention who have a low ROI from moving to a bigger conference, and then I have 3 plus 1 that actually have a high ROI. But we continue on with that. Basically what he's saying here, if you check this out, realistically, if you move from a smaller conference to a bigger conference, he mentioned a couple of teams here. He mentioned Boston College. When they went from the Big East to the ACC, they have not seen the success that they wanted to. So you see that across the board. Also important to bring up here is not only the fact that you haven't seen the success with those teams, it's also important to go over what the remaining teams are to be added and whether or not they actually have a championship pedigree to be taken away. Basically, you see the situation here with USC and UCLA. USC is going to the Big Ten. They bring a championship pedigree. Now, I know we haven't seen as much of that in the post-Pete Carroll days, but they do bring a definite championship pedigree over with them. You see UCLA, and they really don't. In my personal opinion, and again, this is a really important point that I think that Ivan Maisel would probably agree with here, is that what you were before a realignment and what you are after is basically the same thing, plus or minus the dollars in your bank account. Now, the dollars in your bank account is extremely important. But again, if we're talking about USC, UCLA, USC has been a 6-6, 7-5, 8-4, 9-3, somewhere in between there. Maybe not too much below, but never 10, 11, 12, 13 on a consistent basis. So they're probably going to be that when they go over to the Big Ten. I suspect the same thing will happen with, you talk about Texas and Oklahoma. Now, I know Texas this year in the Big 12 is heavily favored. They are the favorite right now to win the league. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if Oklahoma is more consistent. Texas is a lot of hype. But Texas is typically in that, 7, 8, 9 win region, sometimes 10. And when they get 10, it feels like 12 because it's Texas. But again, I would not be surprised if that's the situation going forward because who you were and who you are, as Ivan Maisel said, has basically been the same thing wherever you go. So let's get into that really quickly. First thing I want to talk about is the championship pedigree of the remaining teams to see how much we actually would benefit or how much, conversation there needs to be had around a power two breakaway, because again, if you take away these certain teams, there's still going to be a reason to have these other conferences, but if you take away enough, then there wouldn't. Let's kind of weigh that out here, because I see some interesting things here that I want to talk about. So here is the first list here, and this is what my estimates are from the championship pedigree of the remaining candidates. So what a lot of people were saying was that the more that the SEC and the more that the Big Ten adds away these top teams from these other conferences, the more and more those conferences are going to have a lesser and less chance of winning an actual championship. That makes sense on paper. However, when you see this here, unfortunately, the argument for the power two breakaway is the fact that, there's not that many championships that other teams are going to be able to win. Well, that's true anyways right now, and there's not very many to take away from them. Basically, what I'm saying is that if we saw more of these teams move, we would still probably see the same teams win national championships. However, these teams would be richer in conference realignment. And again, that's what Ivan Maisel was basically saying. So here's what would happen here. I do think that if Clemson were to move, and they are a team, again, right now, from all of the remaining teams that aren't in the SEC and the Big Ten, Clemson has the best national championship pedigree. I am very interested to see what they look like multiple years post Brent Venables. Now, Brent Venables went over to Oklahoma, had a rough first season, 6-6. I did make a video previously. I think they're going to be drastically improved in terms of the depth on their team, quarterback situation, everything like that. So I think that it's interesting to see what Dabo's going to have, because we saw Dabo Swinney and Clemson before they got Brent Venables, and we saw after. So we'll see. We're going to have more. We're going to have one more season. I do think that Clemson still recruits just fine. They do actually bring a championship pedigree. If they were to be added to the SEC or the Big Ten, again, we would probably be in the same situation here. I personally think that Clemson is, I don't want to say regress, but I want to say they're going to return to the mean. Clemson's a small private school, outside of Atlanta and northwestern, South Carolina. It's not necessarily a national championship winner over and over again. I think they've done a really good job these last couple of years. Whether or not they can maintain that magic post Brent Venables, and again, I keep on mentioning that name, but again, it's very important for me to say that Clemson, I think, is going to return. They're not going to go as bad as Virginia Tech has gotten recently, but I wouldn't be surprised if they are, more similar to probably a Washington. And actually, Washington's a fair estimate, where Washington is consistently ranked. They're typically pretty good. Sometimes they'll be down. Sometimes they'll be up. They might make an appearance in the CFP, but for the most part, they are what they are. They're an 8, 9, 10, 11 win team somewhere in that region. Clemson, probably the same thing. So they go from the ACC to the Big Ten or the SEC. Their pocketbooks go up. However, the amount of championships they win probably, if anything, goes down. Same thing with Florida State here. Now, Florida State, the reason why I have Florida State above Notre Dame probably technically has more appearances in the last couple of years in the CFP, in the national championship race than Florida State does. But Florida State's been able to actually win the thing. So Florida State, I know it's been a couple of years since they've done it. But again, Florida State, when they had Jabo, Jameis Winston out there doing his thing, they were actually able to win a national championship. Notre Dame has shown that they can get there. However, that one game against Alabama was just hard to get out of your brain. They've been pretty solid, but again, they cannot really get to that next level. That's why I put them at 3 underneath Florida State. I think Florida State is a good team. However, Florida State the last couple of years, they could be up, they could be down. It just depends on how it is. I do think that those 3 Florida teams, and again, you see how I have Miami down here at number 6. Florida State, Miami, and Florida, they all kind of beat up on each other. It's really hard to have all 3 good at the same time. It's kind of the same situation about having like Stanford, Notre Dame, and Purdue and Vanderbilt all being good at the same time. It's very hard to do so because there's only so many players that can go to those places. Same thing with Miami, Florida State, and Florida, how they all get kind of the players get taken away from them. So many teams recruit Florida so heavy, it's hard for them to maintain that going forward. Up next, I have I have Oregon at number 4. Oregon is a more consistent player in the Pac-12 than Washington is. However, recently has come out and basically, the more and more I've understood is the fact that Oregon is not a Big Ten target. Oregon's not a Big Ten target. I know that a lot of Oregon fans might get upset at that. That's not the situation. Washington is. Oregon is not a Big Ten target. So I don't think that championship pedigree gets taken away because they're not going to be taken. So the Pac-12's championship pedigree from Oregon will probably still remain because they're not going to get plucked away. Washington has a chance. Although I think that the Big Ten is looking southeast first. I wouldn't be surprised if the Big Ten looked at Texas A&M next too. But Florida is probably where they want to go. Maybe Miami, maybe to Clemson, something like that. Florida State, whatever the situation is, that is what the Big Ten is looking at. So Washington is a team that is up there. Again, they've got more championship pedigree recently than Miami does. They're still riding that 5 national championships in 30 years, which is an incredible situation, but they have been down ever since. North Carolina has been up over Miami recently in terms of their success on the field, but really no championship pedigree to speak of. And then Virginia is almost like a Rutgers or a Maryland ad. It would just be for alumni and for regionality and this and that. It's just basically what it is. So when you talk about the fact that the Power 2 can break away, there's only so many teams that they can take away to actually have a better case for their, we should basically only have a national championship with these 2 conferences. It's basically already there. All you're doing with these additions here is just adding to affect their pocketbooks, not to affect the championship pedigree of your conference. All right, so I also wanted to go over this. And again, Ivan Maisel had mentioned a couple of these teams before. The lowest return on investment in terms of wins. Again, the off-the-field stuff, the pocketbooks of these teams is doing just fine. However, when you're talking about the return on investment for moving into a bigger league, we're going to do great things. These are the lower ones that we see. Honorable mention of the low ones is Texas A&M. They've had some success pretty recently, or not pretty recently, early on in their Big 12 days, or excuse me, their SEC days. But as of, I think I actually saw what there was. I think it was Phil Barnett was on the show as well. And he basically said that, do I think that Texas A&M is a blue blood? I don't think they are. Texas A&M is a really, really popular brand. They've got tons of oil money down there. They can throw money at problems. And again, you saw that with them signing that amazing recruiting class. However, putting it all together, getting everything done, it just doesn't seem to always click, man. They can do so many things at Texas A&M. They haven't done them yet. That's why the lowest ROI, they're an honorable mention here. Continuing on here, we have at number 3, Missouri. Missouri actually made some headway. Missouri went to the SEC championship game in year 2 of being in the league, but since then they've just kind of been a little meh, haven't really done very much. They're kind of like, okay, yeah, we've got the St. Louis market, we've got this and that, blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, Missouri is just kind of just like, hey, dude, we got our paycheck, whatever, who cares? 6-6, 7-5, we're good. You're going to get an extension, something like that. Now, whether or not they get that and they address that going forward, I don't know. But I know that Missouri, lowest ROI from a win perspective, I put them at number 3. Number 2 is Colorado. And the reason why Colorado is because they wish they were back in the bank. Actually, if we go to check out their record over year, you could definitely see a difference as to when they joined the Pac-12 versus when they didn't. So you come down here and check this out. So we've got our dear friend, Mr. Bill McCartney, and he was doing great, 11-1, 11-1-1, 8-3-1, 9-2-1, 11-1 with, Rick Neuheisel, 10-2, 10-2, Gary Barnett, 10-3, 9-5. And then we get over here to Dan Hawkins, and just the switch over here from the Big 12 to the Pac-12 was right here. And they're heading into this. They were going 5-7, 3-9, 5-7. And then first year in the Pac-12, 3-10, 1-11, 4-8, 2-10. 4-9, 10-4. I see what you're doing, Mike McIntyre. But then we see, 5-7, 5-7, 5-7, 4-2, 4-8, and then 1-11 last season. They have not had the years that they've wanted to. However, they are above the team at number 1, or excuse me, they would say are lower ranked on the low ROI than number 1. Number 1 is Rutgers, and you can definitely see why. Rutgers, since joining the Big Ten, is 13-66 in Big Ten play. I repeat, they've been 13-66 since Big Ten play. So down here at the Big East, they were high as number 18 under Kyle Flood. They go to the American for 1 year, 6-7, and then they go 8-5, including 5 losses in the Big Ten, and then 4-8, 2-10, 4-8, 1-11, 2-10, 3-6, 5-8, and then 4-8. They have had an absolutely just rough time. Lost the Gator Bowl after they went 5-8. They still got invited to a bowl game. They lost that game too. So, gosh, it just the lowest ROI has been Rutgers. They were added because of regionality, because of New York, because of how many teams in the Big Ten can travel to in and out of New York, blah, blah, blah. We know the whole situation there. But from a win perspective here, they are just the student body, not even the student body, but the administration, they're just so happy that they're there. What they're doing there isn't really much. All right, and now we get to the highest ROI. So I think that for the lowest ROI, I wasn't really able to find a commonality there. And again, you saw the fact that it was Missouri, former Big 12 team, Texas A&M, former Big 12 team, Colorado, former Big 12 team, and then Rutgers, a former Big East team. And then also, it's just, you see the fact they weren't able to put it all together. However, check this out. The highest ROI from these teams here, I have a couple of these teams here that are really interesting. The honorable mention here is BYU. BYU is a weird one because BYU didn't go to a bigger conference, so to say. They went from the Mountain West to the independent ranks. And they've just kind of maintained the fact they've always been a pretty good team. It's really easy to win out there. It's really, they have an in with a lot of those Mormon players. They can bring a lot of them. They're their offensive lines are typically some of the best offensive lines, most underrated offensive lines across the country. Their defensive line, some of their defensive speeds are not necessarily great, but you see the fact that they have been able to do a pretty good job going from the Mountain West up to the independent ranks. Kind of an honorable mention there. I don't know if they technically count, but again, that is a conference realignment move. Number 3, surprisingly, here is Pitt, dude. You check out what the Pitt has done. Pitt, ever since leaving the Big East and going over to the ACC, they are absolutely loving life. They've got a lot of good games and a lot of good wins through the season. We'll actually see a couple of those right here. So come down here and check this out. So Dave Wanstedt was right here at the very end. Dave Wanstedt and then Paul Christ. But you see when they come over here and the fact that, look at this right here. CFP high, 23, 23, 12, 13, 22, 23. They were actually doing a pretty good job here. Now, again, as it is good as a couple of these years down here, 6 and 6, 5 and 7, 9 and 4, better than those. But you see like 8 and 5, 8 and 5, 11 and 3, 8 and 5, 7 and 7, 5 and 7, 5 and 7 is not great, 7 and 6. I think they've actually done a pretty good job with what the hand they've been dealt. The ACC has actually treated Pitt pretty nicely here. So I have honorable mention BYU. Then I have number 3, Pitt. Now I have number 2, TCU. Now TCU has done a really, really good job. The only reason why they're not higher is because last year they went to the CFP, did a really great job, 12-1, blah, blah, blah. TCU the year before was 5 and 7. So they've been up and down. Okay, but they've done a really, really good job. TCU has absolutely loved the fact they've joined the Big 12. But number 1 by far has been Utah. Utah and BYU actually were former Mountain West teams. Utah got the invite to the Pac-12. BYU went to the independent ranks. Utah has absolutely been loving life. Now, they've been doing their best. For right now, they are the title eliminator if you want to make it to the CFP from the Pac-12's perspective. Utah might not make the CFP. But if you want to make the CFP in the Pac-12, you have to beat Utah. It's just the way it is. They are the title eliminator out there. They won the league 2 years in a row. They beat USC twice last year. Granted, there was some questionable calls at that game in Salt Lake City, blah, blah, blah. But again, you see the fact that there were not questionable calls in the national or the conference championship. They definitely just outplayed them. Now, Caleb Williams is doing his best to be a hero out there. But the highest ROI from these teams love it. And you think about this right here. So BYU and Utah. BYU is a national brand, is an international brand. It's got a religion behind it. Utah, Salt Lake City is a pretty big market. TCU, Fort Worth, outside the Dallas area, pretty big market. Pittsburgh is a huge market. If you think about these teams here, which is a big reason why you saw the fact that the American came out and they added UAB, UTSA, FAU, teams like that, teams that weren't necessarily big, but they are in big markets because these big market teams have the potential that if they get everything right, the administration wants to get good, they get the good players, everything all kind of lines up. You have things that you can't teach out there. Again, a big hindrance to like Appalachian State is that Appalachian State's kind of in the middle of nowhere. So it's hard for them to have some of those resources that those other programs can bring in. You see San Diego State and SMU, SMU's in Dallas, San Diego State's in San Diego. They've got some resources that you cannot work on. Like we need 500,000 more people to move here. You can't do that so easy. They already have it built in. These teams right here, smaller teams in bigger markets are able to eventually grow into their shoes, so to say. Utah, TCU, Pitt, and BYU, some of the highest ROI from conference realignment. I think it's really cool to check that whole situation out. You see the fact that, the highest ROI from my perspective there, TCU, Utah, BYU, Pitt, smaller teams in bigger markets that are able to actually eventually build up to that. And you see some of those other teams. Colorado's fallen off. Texas A&M hasn't done nearly as what they've said they were able to do. Missouri had a really good early start in the SEC, has kind of fallen off, and Rutgers has barely even shown up. Again, there's no guarantee that you go from a smaller conference to a bigger conference and you're going to win, but there are certain commonalities. We see that with some of those teams that have already done the move. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for being here. Get in the comments right now. Let me know what you guys think about my point here. Let me know what you guys think about the teams that I mentioned. And again, if you're upset at me, I'm sorry. Just get in the comments and like and subscribe. But again, I'll see you guys later. I am out.